On the day of their third wedding anniversary, Isabella Grant woke up alone in the cold bed of a hospital in Chicago. Beside her, a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers, accompanied by a note in her husband's hurried handwriting. "Sorry, had a last-minute meeting. Love you, Ed." She crumpled the paper in her hand, the scent of the flowers mingling with the antiseptic odor of the room. His love lately had the same smell, something trying to mask the sickness, but only making it more evident. The nurse, a woman with a kind yet prying gaze, entered to check her vitals. "Your husband's a lucky man, dear. I just saw him rushing out with that pretty TV lady, Serena Vaughan. He must be real busy to have such a famous assistant." Isabella didn't respond. She just closed her eyes, but the tears escaped anyway, hot and silent. She devoted her life to a man who only devoted himself to lying. If anyone's ever doubted your ability to start over, subscribe. Because sometimes the best punishment is to bloom where they swore you'd never rise again. The sound of the heart monitor was the soundtrack to her solitude. Each beep marked 1 second less of patience, 1 second more of certainty. She looked at her own legs, still under the white sheet. The memory of the accident was like a flash of pain and twisted metal. A car swerving into oncoming traffic on the Dan Ryan Expressway. Edward was behind the wheel, frozen in panic. It was she who yanked the wheel, slamming the car into the guardrail, saving his life but sacrificing the movement in her legs in the process. "As long as I'm breathing, I'll take care of you," he promised in the ICU, his eyes full of a guilt that, at the time, she mistook for love. Now she understood. The guilt was too heavy a burden for him to carry. It was easier to trade her for a body that walked, that danced, that didn't remind him of his own weakness. 3 years earlier, their world was a vibrant canvas. Isabella, an up-and-coming visual artist, saw her works gracing the walls of major galleries. Her paintings, full of colors and motion, were a reflection of her soul. Edward, a charismatic and ambitious ad executive, was the perfect husband everyone admired. He supported her, celebrated her successes, and seemed like the pillar holding up her universe. The accident changed the color palette. The vibrant gave way to shades of gray. Edward's promise of eternal care quickly turned into a routine of obligation. The man who once carried her up the stairs now sighed with impatience. The business trips became more frequent, the messages shorter, the touch colder. He was still there, but his presence was an absence. The confirmation of what her heart already knew arrived in a plain brown envelope, no sender. Inside, a single sheet of expensive paper, perfumed. The handwriting was elegant, almost mocking. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm sorry to say, but I've been with your husband for 6 months. He says your issue is a burden, but to me he's a relief." Isabella read the letter without shedding a single tear. The pain was so deep it turned into an icy calm, a cutting clarity. She flipped the sheet, and with a pen from the table wrote on the back a response no one would ever read except her. "Understood. He won't see me fall. He'll see me vanish." In that moment, the wounded artist began planning her final masterpiece. Not a painting, but a disappearance. An escape that wasn't about running from him, but about running back to herself. The woman he betrayed was about to die, so another could rise from the ashes. And this new woman wouldn't need legs to stand. She'd learned to fly. Isabella's plan wasn't born in a burst of fury, but sculpted slowly, with the precision of an artist who knows every vein in the stone she intends to transform. The pain of betrayal was no longer an uncontrolled fire. It became the forge where she tempered her resolve. From her hospital bed, she started moving the pieces on her private chessboard, using the one tool Edward could never take from her, her mind. The first call was to an old lawyer, a discreet man who owed a favor to her late father. The conversation was short, coded. She didn't need a messy divorce, didn't want scandals. She just wanted to erase herself, dissolve her legal existence like wiping charcoal sketches from a canvas. Joint accounts, properties, investments, everything was methodically reviewed. She didn't want his money, she wanted her freedom, and freedom had a price. The lawyer, sensing the urgency and seriousness in her voice, agreed to work in the shadows, preparing the paperwork so that, at the right moment, Isabella's signature would be all that was needed to undo 3 years of a life built on shifting sands. While Edward split his time between business meetings and Serena's arms, Isabella waged her own silent battle within the white walls of the hospital. The physical therapy sessions, once a painful reminder of her limitations, became her secret training ground. Every exercise, every forced muscle contraction was an act of rebellion. The doctors said full recovery was unlikely, that she should get used to the wheelchair. But they didn't see what drove her. It wasn't hope of walking again for him, but the certainty that she'd rise for herself. The pain was excruciating, a fire shooting up her legs that made her bite her lips to keep from screaming. But in her mind, she wasn't just moving atrophied muscles. She was rebuilding the foundations of her own temple. Every millimeter of progress was a victory. She learned to hide her improvement, keeping a resigned expression whenever Edward visited. He saw the fragile, dependent wife his guilt demanded, and it reassured him, allowing him to continue his double life without the weight of an awakened conscience. The disappearance began subtly. First, the social media. Isabella's account, once a vibrant portfolio of her art and happy or seemingly happy moments, was deactivated. Friends asked, but Edward gave some excuse. She's unplugging a bit, focusing on recovery. No one questioned it. Then she started selling her artworks, not through galleries but via an anonymous intermediary the lawyer arranged. Valuable pieces, once her pride, were converted to liquid capital, transferred to a new account under a name no one in her social circle would know. She was dismantling the past piece by piece, turning memories into fuel for the future. The hardest decision was distancing herself from her own family. She knew they wouldn't understand, that they'd try to intervene. So, she lied. Told them she'd found a revolutionary experimental treatment in Switzerland and needed total isolation for it to work. It was a painful lie, but necessary. A surgery to remove a tumor, but the tumor wasn't physical, it was Edward. Her discharge from the hospital coincided with the day the lawyer finalized all preparations. Edward picked her up, playing the devoted husband. He helped her into the wheelchair, tucked a blanket over her legs and smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome back, my love. Now everything will go back to normal." Isabella just nodded, an enigmatic smile on her lips. His normal was about to be imploded. That night, in their luxurious apartment overlooking the concrete jungle of Chicago, she watched him sleep. He snored lightly, his face serene like someone unaware of the gathering storm. She felt no hate, she felt a distant pity, like looking at a stranger. With a care bordering on ritual, she rose from the wheelchair, leaning on furniture, and walked silently to his office. On the mahogany desk, she left a single white envelope. Inside, there was no tearful goodbye letter full of accusations, just the divorce papers already signed by her, and a short note, written in the same steady handwriting she'd used on the back of the lover's letter. "As of tomorrow, the woman you betrayed ceases to exist." Before dawn, a discreet car waited on the corner. Behind the wheel was the one person in the world she trusted blindly, the final and most crucial piece of her plan, her twin sister, Olivia. No one knew about Olivia. Separated in childhood after their parents' traumatic divorce, they'd kept secret, deep contact over the years. Olivia, who inherited their mother's free spirit, lived in Miami, a simple and anonymous life, far from the glitter and falseness of Isabella's world. She was the safe harbor, the contingency plan Isabella never thought she'd need. When Isabella called sobbing from the hospital, Olivia didn't hesitate. "Come home, Izzy. Here, you can be whoever you want." As the car pulled away, leaving Chicago's skyscrapers behind, Isabella glanced in the rear view. The city lights seemed distant, like stars from a dead galaxy. She wasn't just leaving a husband. She was leaving an identity, a life that no longer belonged to her. Beside her, Olivia held her hand. "It's over," her sister said. Isabella shook her head, a genuine smile appearing for the first time in months. "No, it's just beginning." Edward woke to sunlight flooding the bedroom. Isabella's side of the bed was untouched. He found the envelope in his office and, seeing the divorce papers, felt a mix of shock and strange relief. The guilt, finally, seemed to have an end point. He tried calling, but her number no longer existed. He searched the apartment for her, but her closets were empty, her personal things gone. Only memories remained, and the echo of a presence now a ghost. He called her family, who repeated the Switzerland treatment story. He felt like a fool. She'd left him, but in such a clean, surgical way that he had nothing to cling to, not even a fight. In the first days, he even felt a hint of freedom. Now, he could live his romance with Serena without subterfuge. But Isabella's silence was louder than any scream. Her absence was a constant presence, a black hole starting to suck the light from his life. He didn't know it, but in a house facing the ocean in Miami, Isabella was giving her first brushstroke on a blank canvas. She wouldn't sign as Isabella Grant anymore. From that day on, she was Olivia Reed, and Olivia Reed was about to paint the world with the colors of her rebirth, while Edward's world slowly faded to shades of gray. While Miami's sun poured golden light over South Beach, Isabella, now living under the identity of Olivia Reed, felt the salty sea air fill her lungs like an antidote to the years of thin, polluted Chicago air. Her sister's house was a refuge of wood and glass, nestled amid the lush vegetation of the coast, a place where the sound of waves drowned out the noise of thoughts. In the first months, the freedom was almost dizzying, a sensation so intense it bordered on pain. She relearned to walk, not just physically but through life. Mornings were dedicated to long, exhausting physical therapy sessions on the beach sand, a far cry from sterile hospital rooms. The soft sand's resistance forced her muscles to work in ways no machine could replicate. Each step, initially shaky and uncertain, was a reconquest. Olivia, her sister, was her shadow and her pillar, a constant presence offering no pity, just firm support and sharp humor that kept her from drowning in self-pity. "You're not relearning to walk, Izzy. You're learning to leave footprints no one can erase," she'd say, watching her sister battle her own weakness, sweat mixing with tears of effort. The art, which she thought she'd abandoned along with her old identity, called to her again, first as a whisper, then as a demand. In an improvised studio overlooking the sea, she set up an easel. The first canvas stayed blank for weeks. Her hands, which once danced with brushes, seemed strange, disconnected from her soul. She was afraid that the artist Isabella Grant had died with Edward's wife. It was Olivia who broke the spell. One night she entered the studio with 2 glasses of wine and put on soft music. "You don't have to paint for the world, for galleries or critics. Paint what's in there," she said, pointing to her sister's chest. "Paint the anger, the pain, the confusion. Paint the silence. Just paint." That night, Isabella picked up a brush and, instead of vibrant colors, dipped it in the deepest black. What emerged on the canvas wasn't an image, but a raw explosion of emotion. Violent strokes, dark smudges, a storm of feelings she'd kept dammed up. It was the most honest painting she'd ever made, and for the first time in years, she felt alive. From that day, she didn't stop. Her new works were different, more visceral, more profound. They were signed by Olivia Reed, an artist no one knew, but whose soul was imprinted in every stroke. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Edward tried to fill the void left by Isabella with the noise of a life he thought he wanted. He and Serena became the new it couple, attending the hottest events, gracing gossip columns. He showered her with expensive gifts, luxurious trips, trying to buy the same admiration Isabella gave freely. But there was something hollow in it all. Serena was beautiful, ambitious, and socially perfect, but her presence was like an echo in an empty room. She didn't challenge him, didn't inspire him, didn't see the soul behind the successful ad exec. She loved what he represented, not the man he was. Conversations were about appearances, the next event, the latest gossip. There was no silent complicity, no inside jokes, no depth that he only realized he'd lost when it was too late. At night, when the apartment was quiet, he'd catch himself staring at the empty space beside him in bed, expecting to hear Isabella's soft breathing and feel a chill of loneliness no company could warm. The search for Isabella became a veiled obsession. Officially, he'd accepted the divorce and the Switzerland story. But privately, he hired a detective, one of the best in the country. "Find her," he ordered. "I don't care the cost." He needed answers, needed to understand. How could she just vanish? How could she erase herself from his life with the coldness of a surgeon? Weeks turned to months, and the detective returned empty-handed. Isabella Grant had become a ghost, her documents cancelled, accounts closed, digital trail non-existent. The only lead was a large transfer to an account under Olivia Reed, but that account went inactive right after a full cash withdrawal, making tracking impossible. Edward felt like a man chasing a mirage, the woman he'd sworn to care for and then betrayed. The woman he'd underestimated in her fragility had proven stronger and smarter than he ever imagined. The impotence gnawed at him, undermining his confidence and focus at work. In Miami, Olivia Reed's life flourished. She began exhibiting her new paintings in a small local gallery, without fanfare. At first, it was tourists and locals drawn to those magnetic canvases, depicting female strength and resilience in an almost mythical way. The figures in her paintings were women emerging from water, women with roots growing from their feet, women whose scars shone like gold. There was a truth in those images that transcended technique. A renowned art critic passing through the area saw one of her works in the window and entered, mesmerized. He wrote a column in a national newspaper describing Olivia Reed as the anonymous and powerful voice of a new generation of American artists, a painter who doesn't use paint, but her own soul. It was the spark that started the fire. Suddenly the name Olivia Reed was on the lips of the art world. Galleries in Chicago and New York started calling. International collectors wanted to know who this mysterious artist was, painting rebirth so viscerally. Isabella, or rather Olivia, watched it all with serene calm, guided by her sister's practical wisdom. She turned down most offers, choosing carefully whom to work with, staying out of the spotlight, letting her art speak for itself. She didn't want fame. She wanted the peace of being who she was, the satisfaction of turning her pain into beauty. Sometimes the most elegant revenge is just to keep living and let the silence tell the rest of the story. Edward, on the other hand, saw his world crumble in slow motion. Isabella's absence, at first just a nagging ghost, became an omen of his own ruin. He became more irritable, more careless in business. Important contracts were lost due to his inattention. His agency, once a benchmark of creativity, started losing clients and talent. Serena, sensing the instability, became more demanding, more needy, her once glamorous presence now a burden. The perfect couple image began to crack, revealing the fissures of a relationship built on betrayal. He caught himself thinking of Isabella constantly, not with love, but a mix of anger and reluctant admiration. She'd beaten him, not with shouts or accusations, but with the deadliest weapon: silence and indifference. She'd simply erased him from her life, and in doing so made him question his own existence. Who was he without her admiration, without the counterpoint of her intelligence, without the anchor of her presence? He was just a wealthy, successful man, and for the first time he realized how little that was. Her disappearance wasn't an escape, it was a judgment. And he, Edward Hayes, had been found guilty and sentenced to live with the ghost of the woman he'd both destroyed and, paradoxically, created. 2 years passed. 2 years that, for Isabella, were an era of reconstruction, and for Edward, a slow and inexorable descent into the abyss. The name Olivia Reed, once a whisper in Miami's art scene, now echoed in galleries in Paris, New York, and London. The mysterious artist, who never appeared at her own openings and communicated with the world only through her canvases, became a phenomenon. Her works, exploring the theme of female rebirth, were fought over by collectors who saw in them not just beauty, but a universal truth. Critics strained to decipher the painter's identity. Speculation ran that she was a recluse, a survivor of deep trauma, a woman who'd turned her pain into the purest form of art. No one, absolutely no one, connected the enigmatic figure of Olivia Reed to the delicate visual artist Isabella Grant, the discarded and forgotten wife of a Chicago ad exec. Isabella had achieved the impossible, died to the world that hurt her, and been reborn in a universe she created herself on her own terms. While Olivia Reed's star ascended, Edward Hayes's faded like a falling meteor. The ruin didn't come all at once, but in a succession of blows. The first was personal. Serena, in a desperate bid to hold on to the crumbling relationship, announced she was pregnant. The news, which should have been an anchor, was just more weight. Edward looked at her and felt no joy, just the burden of another complication. The scandal came soon after. Amid a heated argument, Serena lost the baby. The grief, however, was overshadowed by public humiliation. A rival journalist of Serena's, sniffing out the crisis, published a devastating article, exposing not just the loss, but leaking screenshots of old conversations between her and Edward, dating back to when Isabella was still home, recovering from the accident. The cruel words, the disdain for the invalid wife, the arrogance of the affair, all came to light. Edward's image as the devoted husband, already scratched, was shattered. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a cruel man who mocked the misfortune of the woman who'd saved him. The professional blow was a direct consequence. Edward's ad agency, which relied on an image of trust and modernity, faced a mass boycott. Clients, especially brands with strong female appeal, severed ties overnight. No one wanted their image tied to the most hated man of the moment on social media. The company he'd built with such effort began to bleed, losing money, staff, and relevance. Edward found himself isolated. Friends drifted away. Business contacts stopped returning calls. Serena, after the scandal, vanished from his life, leaving only the bitter trail of failure. Alone in his massive apartment, surrounded by luxury and silence, Edward was a king in a collapsing house of cards. He spent his days revisiting old news clippings, headlines that once celebrated his success and now narrated his fall. He pored over photos of Isabella, not the strong woman who'd rejected him in the gallery, but the young, smiling artist from the early marriage days, desperately trying to remember where he'd gone wrong, at what exact point he'd traded gold for tin. He finally understood the final phrase she'd left him: "The woman you betrayed ceases to exist." He thought it was a threat of departure, but it was a prophecy of transformation. She hadn't just left, she'd become someone else. And he, in turn, would never be the same. Her world bloomed in vibrant colors, while his boiled down to an eternal, solitary shade of gray. The revelation, when it came, was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of him. On a sleepless night, scrolling aimlessly through news channels, he stopped on a report about Olivia Reed's latest exhibition in Chicago, titled "Rising from Ashes." The camera panned through the packed gallery, showing admiring faces, until it focused on the main piece. Edward's heart stopped. The painting, imposingly large, depicted a scene of power and reversal. A man, with vaguely familiar features, knelt, his face twisted in supplication. Before him, standing tall and serene, was a woman. She didn't look at the man, her gaze lost in the horizon, as if he were just an insignificant detail on the ground. It was the inverted mirror of their past, him the powerful one, her the dependent. But it wasn't the scene that shocked him. It was the style. The way light touched the woman's skin, the brushstroke defining the man's shadow, the palette mixing the darkness of pain with the warm tones of overcoming. It was unmistakable. It was Isabella's style. There was no doubt. The woman he'd destroyed was now signing her own rebirth. The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. Olivia Reed. The twin sister. The story she'd told, the escape, the new identity. Everything clicked in his mind. She hadn't just left him, she'd erased him and rewritten herself from scratch, becoming stronger, more successful, more admired than he'd ever been. Her revenge wasn't destruction but creation. She hadn't attacked him. She'd simply bloomed so brightly that her light eclipsed his existence, leaving him in shadow. In that moment, staring at the TV screen, Edward felt the weight of his own mediocrity. He'd underestimated her in every way, underestimated her love, her pain, her intelligence, and above all, her ability to rise. He thought he'd broken her, but he'd only freed her from the gilded cage he kept her in. The mysterious artist the world celebrated was his Isabella, and he, the man who'd had her in his hands, had lost her in the most humiliating way, not to another man, but to herself. The initial anger gave way to a new, overwhelming feeling, a mix of sick admiration and deep despair. He needed to see her. He needed to confront the ghost he'd created. Driven by irrational impulse, he caught the first flight to Miami. He had no plan, just a visceral need to confirm with his own eyes, to be in the presence of the woman who'd become his masterpiece and his ruin. He found the address of the gallery representing Olivia Reed on the coast and drove there, heart pounding. The gallery was a clean, minimalist space facing the sea, and there she was, not in a painting but in the flesh, in the middle of the room, discussing the setup of a new exhibition with two men, Isabella or Olivia. It didn't matter, she was different. Her hair, once long and wavy, was short in a modern cut that framed her face and exposed the strength of her neck. Her posture was firm, upright, with no trace of the fragility he'd known. She used no wheelchair, not even a cane. She moved with a grace and confidence he'd never seen before. And she smiled, a genuine lit-up smile as she gestured, explaining something about a painting's lighting. That smile hit him like a physical blow. It was the smile of the Isabella he'd fallen for, but now fuller, freer. It was the smile of a woman who no longer needed him, and that realization was the most painful of all. Edward stood frozen in the gallery entrance, the sound of waves outside muffled by the pounding of his blood in his ears. Watching her from afar was torture. Every gesture, every smile, every word he couldn't hear was proof that her world had kept spinning, faster and brighter, after ejecting him from its orbit. He'd seen her fragile, dependent, broken. The woman before him was a force of nature, an embodiment of resilience he'd only read about in books. The need to break that spell, to reinsert himself in her narrative even as a villain, became unbearable. He took a step inside, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing in the polished silence. Her eyes, focused on a canvas, moved slowly toward him, first with the casual curiosity one gives a new visitor, then with an almost imperceptible narrowing, an icy recognition that lasted a fraction of a second before being replaced by a mask of polite indifference. "Isabella," he whispered, his voice hoarse, almost inaudible. Her name on his lips sounded like a profanation, a relic from a forgotten time. She tilted her head slightly, a serene, almost amused smile playing at the corners of her lips. Her gaze didn't waver, showed no shock, no anger, no pain, just a disconcerting calm, like a deep ocean unmoved by a single stone thrown at its surface. "Sorry, sir. You must be mistaking me. My name is Olivia." The denial was so smooth, so natural, that for an instant he almost doubted himself. But then he saw it. In her eyes, behind the facade of Olivia Reed, he saw a flash of the Isabella he knew, the woman he'd loved and betrayed. It was a glint of steel, forged in the fire of disappointment. Her denial wasn't a lie, it was a declaration of independence. It was confirmation that Isabella Grant, his woman, was dead and buried. "No, I'm not mistaken," he insisted, advancing, ignoring the uncomfortable looks from the two men with her. "I know it's you, Izzy. The hair's different, the posture. But the eyes, your eyes are the same." She kept the smile, but her body tensed subtly. "Sir, I'd appreciate if you kept a respectful distance. I don't know this Isabella you're looking for, but clearly I'm not her. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm in a work meeting." She turned, a clear dismissal, intending to shift her attention back to the paintings. But Edward couldn't accept it. Being dismissed so easily, treated like a bothersome stranger, was a humiliation his ego couldn't bear. He grabbed her arm, an act of desperation. "Please don't do this. I know I messed up. I was an idiot, blind. But I regret it every day. I lost everything, Isabella. Everything. And I realized none of it mattered without you." His touch was the catalyst. Her calm shattered, not into fury, but into a cutting coldness. She yanked her arm back with surprising strength and looked him in the eyes. For the first time, he saw something beyond serenity. He saw the memory of every tear, every lonely night, every broken promise. "You didn't lose me, Edward. You threw me away," she said, her voice low but loaded with a weight that filled the room. "You broke me completely, but in trying to destroy me, you taught me to live. The woman you're looking for, the one who needed you, who believed your lies, she doesn't exist anymore. And I'm grateful to you for that. You gave me the most valuable gift, my own life." Each word was a blow, precise and fatal. No drama, just raw truth. He staggered back as if physically struck. The words he'd rehearsed in his mind, the pleas, died in his throat. What can you say to a woman who turns your destruction into her greatest strength? I still love you, he managed, the words sounding pathetic even to him. She laughed, not a mocking laugh, but a genuine one, almost sad. No, Edward, you don't love me. You love the memory of what we had. You love the idea of having me back to fix the mess you made of your own life. You're in love with your regret, not me. Love doesn't look like what you did. She made a discreet nod to the two men, who now positioned themselves subtly between her and Edward. They were the gallery's security. I think you've found the exit, sir, one said, his voice firm but polite. Despair overtook Edward. He couldn't leave like this. He couldn't accept this final defeat. Isabella, please give me a chance to show I've changed, he begged, voice choked, the tears he'd held finally streaming down his face. He, Edward Hayes, the powerful ad exec, crying in the middle of an art gallery before the woman he'd discarded. He tried to advance again, to touch her one last time, and that's when the security intervened, holding his arms firmly. Sir, please leave, or we'll have to call the police. The scene was surreal. The man who'd once been the center of her universe, now restrained, expelled like an intruder. And then, the coup de grace. Someone in the gallery, a visitor or perhaps a local journalist drawn by the commotion, raised a phone and started recording. The whole scene, the powerful, broken man crying and begging, being held by security, while the woman, the acclaimed artist Olivia Reed, watched with unshakable serenity, like a queen observing an unruly subject. She didn't need to say more. The image spoke for itself. As he was dragged out, Edward saw the phones flash. He knew with nauseating certainty that image would haunt him forever. The scene went viral in hours. The headline was merciless. Fallen mogul humiliates himself in gallery, rejected by ex-wife, the mysterious artist Olivia Reed. The whole world was now witness to his fall, and Isabella's final rise. She hadn't just beaten him, she'd let him destroy himself with his own hands, under the spotlights he once loved. It was the most elegant and cruel revenge he could imagine. Months passed since the Miami encounter, an event that crystallized in the internet's collective memory as a spectacle of poetic justice. For Edward, that day was the final nail in his social and professional coffin. The image of his despair, captured and replicated millions of times, became a meme, a symbol of his downfall. He became a caricature of the man he once was, the repentant cheater, the humiliated powerful. Unable to bear the looks of pity and contempt, he withdrew completely from public life. He sold what remained of his agency for a fraction of its original value and moved to the old family cabin in the remote woods of upstate New York, an isolated place where the only sound was the wind and his own tormenting memories. There he lived a twilight existence, collecting old news clippings, headlines that once celebrated his success and now narrated his fall. He spent days revisiting photos of Isabella, trying desperately to remember where he'd gone wrong, at what exact point he'd traded gold for tin. He finally understood the phrase she'd left him. The woman you betrayed ceases to exist. It was a prophecy of transformation. She hadn't just left. She'd become someone else. And he would never be the same. Her world bloomed in vibrant colors, while his boiled down to an eternal, solitary shade of gray. While Edward sank into his self-imposed exile, Isabella as Olivia Reed reached the pinnacle. She became the cover of Art International, the world's most prestigious art magazine. The cover photo was a powerful portrait, her standing in her ocean-facing studio, gaze firm and serene with one of her canvases in the background, a phoenix rising from flames. The accompanying interview delved into her life and art philosophy, but she skillfully sidestepped any questions about her past, maintaining the aura of mystery that fascinated the public. At one point, the journalist, trying to draw out something personal, asked if any of her works, especially the Rising from Ashes series, was inspired by someone specific in her life. Isabella paused, a subtle smile touching her lips, and replied with a calm voice carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "My inspiration comes from an idea, not a person," she said. "It comes from the idea that we're stronger in our broken places. I was inspired perhaps by someone who tried to snuff out my light, Little did that person know the fire that burned me was the same one that ignited me. The phrase, elegant and full of subtext, was quoted worldwide, becoming a mantra for women seeking to start over. She never saw Edward again. She didn't need to. The justice she sought wasn't watching him suffer, but ensuring his suffering no longer defined her life. Her revenge wasn't an act, but a state of being. It was continuing to walk, to paint, to live, to love. She found a new kind of love. Not the feverish, possessive love she'd had for Edward, but a quiet, mature love beside a local architect who fell for her art first and then the woman behind it. A man who didn't try to possess her, but admired her strength and celebrated her independence. Together they traveled the world, not to escape, but to absorb new colors, new textures, new inspirations for her canvases. Isabella, the woman who once believed her life ended in a car accident and a hospital bed, discovered that had actually been her true starting point. She'd finally become the protagonist of her own artwork, one not about pain or betrayal, but about the indomitable beauty of the human spirit. In the end, their story boiled down to a cruel paradox. He, the man who left her because she couldn't walk, ended up paralyzed, trapped in a past he himself destroyed, unable to take a step toward the future. And she, the woman he judged weak and immobile, learned to fly so high that her old world became just a distant speck on the ground. She walked again. He, metaphorically, never would. True freedom isn't forgetting who hurt you. It's remembering but feeling nothing anymore. It's looking back and seeing only the path traveled, not the weight you were forced to carry. Because in the end, the greatest victory against those who tried to bury you is simply proving you were a seed. So, what did you think? On a scale of 0 to 10, what score would you give it? Leave your comments saying what city you're watching from and subscribe to follow our next stories. Thanks so much for the company and see you next time.